I want you all to imagine a fire truck. I now want you to imagine that fire truck bursting into flames. And that's what I think of when I see this story. The Bernie Sanders campaign is being accused of not paying a living wage to its staffers. They're saying that they're getting the equivalent of $13 an hour. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is campaigning federally for a $15 base rate. You'd think that Bernie would put his money where his mouth is and actually pay that rate to his own staffers. Now, the issue arises because staffers say they have to work 60 hours a week, which means even after they receive $36,000 a year, they're getting only around $13 an hour. I actually think it's closer to 11. So no, they're not getting $15 an hour. You could argue that Bernie is providing the equivalent, but then you can see what his campaign manager says. His campaign manager wants them to work 6 days a week. Once again, another issue of a fire truck being on fire. It's pure irony. Aren't these the people that claim to have championed the 40-hour work week and to champion the weekend, days off? Why then would Bernie have his staffers working 6 days a week? Just hire more staffers, right? Pay them the same, hire more people. This is the classic example of the employer versus the employee argument, and it shows why arguing for a $15 base rate nationally, it's not that easy. It's rather complicated. And I find it strange that we often have stories about these democratic socialist the democratic socialist types not upholding their own values. What I want to go through today is I want to take a look at this story about the Bernie campaign and the call for a $15 equivalent. I want to see why they're not willing to offer that they should. But I also have another story about this woman, Julia Salazar, who apparently dipped into a $10 million trust fund, which is strange because she claims to be, coming from humble means. And she's a democratic socialist. It's another example of these progressive activist types who claim to represent the working class when in reality, they represent a privileged elite. Now, look, I was a big fan of Bernie in 2016, and he's let me down quite a bit. And while Bernie certainly isn't the wealthiest person in the world, as of today, he is a millionaire. I still don't think that's bad. By all means, congratulations on your success. But he still does come from a privileged political class. Though he's had a history of fighting for people's rights and standing up for what he believes in, he's an independent. I can absolutely respect that. I have to question why he won't pay his staffers what they want. But let's break the story down. Let's not keep ranting. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate. If you want to support my work, there's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. But of course, the best thing you can do if you want to support me, share this video. YouTube has deranked independent commentary. That means if I can expect, any kind of marketing at all, I'm going to rely on you guys to share these videos if you like them. Otherwise, if you hate me, tell me why in the comments below, and I will respect your right to do that too. From Newsweek, a bit of a synopsis on a Washington Post story, but let's read. Campaign workers for Bernie Sanders have taken aim at one of the senator's key policies in his 2020 presidential run, raising the federal minimum wage. According to the Washington Post, some members of Sanders' campaign team have been lobbying to raise their wages so that they make the $15 hourly rate that the Vermont senator has frequently called for both on the campaign trail and in Washington, D.C. The Post obtained a draft of a letter that the campaign's union planned to send to Sanders' campaign manager, Fayez Shakir, which read in part that workers, quote, cannot be expected to build the largest grassroots organizing program in American history while making poverty wages. Given our campaign's commitment to fighting for a living wage of at least $15 an hour, we believe it is only fair the campaign would carry through this commitment to its own field team. The letter states that field organizers are working at least 60 hours a week, which lowers the average pay per hour to $13 an hour, saying, many field staffers are barely managing to survive financially, which is severely impacting our team's productivity and morale. Some field organizers have already left the campaign as a result, the letter says. I kid you not. Let's stop here. Campaign staffers for Bernie Sanders have left because they were underpaid. I also want to stress something else. Okay, listen. I love the idea of the 40-hour work week, 100%. Personally, I work every single day. I'm working a ridiculous amount of hours. That's my choice. But I do respect the right to individuals to have their weekend and have their days off. I also think it's fair to point out, while Bernie does pay around $36,000 a year to staffers, by having them be salary and telling them they should work 60 hours a week or 6 days a week, you're effectively bypassing this base pay. You're saying, oh, look, we're going to give you more. right? Here's what people do. They'll say, well, what's 36, divided by 52 weeks divided by 40? Ah, you're getting $17 an hour. Sounds great, right? Then you put them on salary, then they don't get overtime, and then you can make them work more hours without paying them. It's common. Regardless of whether or not you want to fault Bernie for this, Bernie is falling into the common trap. But I will tell you this, the most interesting thing about this whole story, whether or not you want to side with Bernie or otherwise, is that Shakir has said they're paying a competitive rate. Let me read this for you. The Sanders campaign, this is from the Washington Post, by the way. The Sanders campaign late Thursday issued a statement lauding its union contract. Quote, "We know our campaign offers wages and benefits competitive with other campaigns, as is shown by the latest fundraising reports," Shakir said. "Every member of the campaign, from the candidate on down, joined this movement in order to defeat Donald Trump and transform America. Bernie Sanders is the most pro-worker and pro-labor candidate running for president. We have tremendous staff who are working hard. Bernie and I both strongly believe in the sanctity of the collective bargaining process, and we will not deviate from our commitment to it." It was unclear when or whether Sanders had been made aware of the situation. Let me stress this point. I want you to really think about this. We know our campaign offers wages and benefits competitive with other campaigns. I ask you, why should I care what other campaigns are paying? You're essentially saying that the people who work for your campaign, who are building this grassroots effort, who are saying I'm not getting a living wage, should be happy because neither is any other campaign. Like, okay, hold on. Imagine this. Someone comes to you and says, I'm not being paid a living wage. You say, hey, you should be happy. No one else is getting a living wage either. That's not an effective response. Additionally, I find it interesting that they're saying they're offering competitive wages. Since when did avowed democratic socialists worry about competing in the marketplace? Think about it. What they're saying is, hey, everyone pays this. It's okay. No, the issue of raising base pay nationally is because, as they've said themselves, employers don't want to pay more than they have to. And that's the problem. Without the government saying you have to, people won't. I then ask you, Bernie, because maybe Bernie doesn't know. Maybe it's his campaign manager, but then this reflects very poorly on your campaign manager. I ask, then, put your money where your mouth is. If you think people deserve a living wage, get them off salary, have them track their hours, and pay them hourly $15 an hour. Because if they're working 6 days a week, I mean, already that's a lot to ask of somebody to work. Let's go back to the Newsweek story and read some of the statements from Bernie staffers. They read, the story says, according to documents reviewed by the newspaper, the issues regarding wages extend back to May. Though talks between the campaign union and Shakir appear to be ongoing, it is unknown if Sanders is aware of the requests from campaign workers. So again, I want to make sure I'm not being overly hyperbolic. It's not necessarily on Bernie right now, but I think it's fair to point out, this should be a wake-up call for Bernie and anybody working for his campaign about the complexities of wage negotiation. It's not as simple to just say, we will give you X. Okay, you've got market forces to consider, fine. But in that case, if Bernie's principles are, providing a living wage, you should not be looking at any other company. You also have to consider salary, hourly, and what the campaign can afford. We're not talking about a business here. Bernie is selling an idea. And in order for that idea to be funded, people have to choose to give money to him in exchange for nothing tangible. In which case, we're not even basing the wages off of something productive. Bernie then has to decide, if I have $1 million, how am I going to spend it? Ad campaigns, paying for flights and trips to go campaign, or paying people more money? Therein lies the huge problem. If other campaigns are paying the same as Bernie, and they're under no obligation to pay more, they will have an advantage. They can spend more money on campaigning, which will give them the ability to win. More marketing, more votes. If Bernie is dragged down with high labor costs, he will have less money to campaign on. Thus, it is a massive disadvantage. And it's unfortunate. Look, if Bernie's ideas are good, then Bernie's ideas should win. And it's unfortunate that he faces his own disadvantage. Perhaps the only thing you can really do is prove you care by providing a living wage to your staff. Let's read. They say, Sanders' campaign became the first to unionize, a move which was publicized in March in Mach, I'm assuming they mean March, it says Mach on the screen, by the way, March 2019, just weeks after the senator announced his 2020 presidential run. Since then, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro have both unionized their campaign workers. According to the agreement made between Sanders' campaign and the union, which began on May 2nd, field workers were to be paid $36,000 annually rather than by hours worked. However, on May 17th, the Post states that Shakir recommended that field organizers' pay be raised to $42,000 during a staff meeting. In the same meeting, he also suggested that the work week be extended to 6 days a week, the union letter said. According to the Post, the union rejected Shakir's plan in part because of the health care costs that would fall to the campaign workers to pay. They say this month workers used Slack to express distress at not being paid a, quote, living wage. Now I want to stop here. If the campaign believes $42,000 a year at 6 days a week is a living wage, that's fine if they think it's fair. I think it's not necessarily that bad of a wage, but if your own staffers are saying you don't pay a living wage, well, then we have to weigh their opinion on the matter, in my opinion, more highly than Bernie's. If we're talking about the rights of labor and what labor wants, well, then we're going to listen to what they have to say. And they're saying they're not being paid a living wage. Listen to this quote. I am struggling financially to do my job, and in my state, we've already had 4 people quit in the past 4 weeks because of financial struggles, one worker told Shakir via the service, according to the Post. It is deplorable, in my opinion, that someone should have to quit their job because they're not being paid enough to live. Okay, it's complicated. It's complex. It's not an easy problem to solve. I fully recognize that. I understand that they're trying to do better. They have a unionized staff. But you also need to consider the market, the economy. Now, I think it's fair to point out Bernie might actually use this as an argument for socialism by saying people shouldn't have to, the prices shouldn't be too high and healthcare is too expensive. The complaint from my staff is their healthcare. I'm not doing a very good impression, by the way. I could do better. The point is, you could easily make the argument that they're complaining about healthcare if only healthcare was nationalized, right? In the end, I defer to Bernie's staffers because that's Bernie's position, and Bernie is the employer. Bernie should give them exactly what they need to live, period. Otherwise, it's all hypocrisy. Bernie campaigns on this idea that people should be able to live comfortably doing whatever job they do. Well, if they're telling you they're not comfortable, then you're doing something wrong, Bernie, and you got to put your money where your mouth is. Again, I want to stress, I don't think this is that bad for Bernie Sanders. I think this is actually a really interesting story because it's an example of the complexities of wage negotiations and the free market. And we're in a mixed economy, mind you. We pay around, I think, in total, 45% of all income we have in various taxes. So we are not a laissez-faire or socialist system. We're actually close to the middle. Let's read on. Another said he needed a raise because I need to be able to feed myself. Shakir later responded to the messages, the Post said, telling workers they were owed an explanation about where things stood between the campaign and the union. He also expressed disappointment in the union, voting against raising wages, saying, I have no idea what debates and conversations were had, but candidly, it was a disappointing vote from my perspective. But the campaign leadership respected the union process and the will of the membership. According to the Post, the union plans to send a new proposal to the Sanders campaign that includes a $46,800 salary for field organizers and $62,000 for regional field directors. Regional directors currently make $48,000 a year. The proposal also asks for the campaign to pay 100% of healthcare costs for workers who make less than $36,000 a year and pay 85% for those who make over $36,000. The news over the negotiations come after the House of Representatives passed a bill to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Following the vote, Sanders posted on Twitter to praise the House for passing the bill. So look, that's basically it. They go on to say that, Bernie Sanders has criticized Mitch McConnell because Bernie Sanders is trying to get Mitch to vote on this in the Senate, criticizing him, saying if you think $7.25 minimum is acceptable, that's his prerogative. Here's the thing. The issue is, at its heart, not how much his people are being paid or their opinions. Let's get pragmatic for a second. The real issue is that Bernie Sanders is offering salaries. This can all be solved very simply by Bernie no longer paying a base salary and just paying hourly $15 an hour. Period. If Bernie Sanders is campaigning for $15 an hour nationwide, he should put his money where his mouth is. Now, here's the thing. What's interesting, I guess we already kind of went over this, so I don't need to necessarily rehash it, but Common Dream says after House passes $15 minimum wage, Bernie demands McConnell let Senate vote. I find it all rather hypocritical, and while I'm trying not to be overly critical of Bernie, I do want to stress he is the stop. He is where, the buck stops with Bernie. If Bernie's staff are upset because they're not getting paid a living wage, their own words, if they can't feed themselves, their own words, and if 4 staffers have already quit in one office because they're not being paid enough, Bernie needs to know about this. It's his responsibility, and he dropped the ball, period. I think, Bernie can solve this, and I'd give him the chance to. If Bernie comes out and says it was a mistake, we'll solve the problem, then I respect that. But we cannot have someone championing this wage increase while his own staff is calling him out. I also want to stress, Vox references in reference to the $15 wage increase, or the increase to $15 an hour, potentially 1.3 million jobs could be lost by this. We have to pay attention to automation. This is why I'm with Andrew Yang on this issue. Yang opposes the increase to $15 because he doesn't believe it will solve the problem. And in fact, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I could be getting this wrong, but my understanding is he's recognizing the increasing automation as the increase in automation as a threat. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, low-level jobs are going to automate out these positions. So when you increase that wage, it will just expedite these jobs being taken away. While progressives have noted, these companies are going to get rid of those jobs anyway, okay? So you might as well increase their wages. I will stress, the important thing to consider is, if you have to pay someone $36,000 a year, let's say you pay him $25,000, you're now told you got to pay him $36,000. A kiosk costs $30,000. You might as well say, hey, we make the investment for $30,000 up front, we save money. But here's the thing. At $25,000, you say, we're going to save $5,000 this year by not upgrading. We might as well put it off. That's why automation is going to cost people their jobs. Now, it goes beyond just low-level jobs. Truckers, manufacturing, they're going to be automated too. So I think Yang is right to be talking about this issue. And it was really interesting. I urge you to go check out the Andrew Yang, Ben Shapiro podcast because they actually agreed on some important issues while they disagreed on many. They brought up some really interesting points about the VAT tax being a good idea, although they disagree on how far it should go. And even Ben Shapiro says, once we get to the point where automation is taking over, we should have the universal basic income conversation. Yang's position is we should have the conversation now before we get to that point. So it's all very interesting. I don't want to make this video super long, but I do want to just highlight this weird story about Democratic socialist Julia Salazar. The Daily Mail reports that she dipped into her $10 million trust fund to help launch her New York State Senate campaign, despite claiming she had a poverty-stricken childhood. Apparently, she went on to say there was an error, and the trust fund actually holds $400,000. I don't care if it's $400,000. I don't care if it's $10 million. The point I want to make is, too often, someone from humble means, south side of Chicago, high school dropout, these socialist types are not working class. Okay, Bernie Sanders is an activist. He's not one of these wealthy, corporate Democrats, but he is wealthy today. That's fine. I'm not criticizing him for this, but he is still part of the elite political class. My understanding is the only job he's ever had has been a politician. We can then see Julia Salazar. Okay, let's say you got a $400,000 trust fund. You're a trust fund kid. You're still... Why is it that we have wealthy white progressives criticizing white people and criticizing the working class while claiming to represent them? The biggest concern I have with everything being done by these progressives is that they're actually doing damage to to upward mobility in this country. And it makes me wonder, do these elites really care about upward mobility, or are they trying to damage it? When you increase taxes, when they say we want to increase taxes on the top 1%, without actually creating a new tax bracket, all that really does is make it harder for people to move up from making $250K a year to, say, $5 million per year. Because increasing taxes on everybody who makes more than $250K a year doesn't actually damage the people who are worth tens of millions of dollars and more, because they're already well beyond that. Sure, they'll pay more taxes, but they have more disposable income. So I think the big challenge for me with a lot of their policies is it's not thought out completely, and they need to understand the complexities of how these things get negotiated. So to Bernie Sanders, I will stress, you are learning an important lesson. Okay, you're paying salaries? Well, they're not living wages. You are at a severe disadvantage if you pay more because other campaigns won't. And that means they'll have more money to campaign on. It's a double-edged sword. You know, if you don't do it, you look like a hypocrite. If you do, you lose out. I don't know what the solution is. I don't. I certainly think people should be paid a living wage. But what is a living wage? I honestly don't know. We can look at some studies in the past that say, in order to be a happy median, you need $77,000 per year. It's gone up. In fact, in Manhattan, it's ridiculous. It's like $130K per year if you want to just be median. Most people don't make that. And Bernie Sanders certainly couldn't afford that. So how do we solve that problem? I don't know. The issue isn't how much people are being paid per hour. The issue is the value of an hour, period. When we're talking about what to pay someone, the money is rather meaningless. Okay, you need to think about all of the different aspects of the economy. The way I explained it in one video is put it this way. If you train for years to become a baker, and now you make $15 an hour, that $15 an hour entitles you to like 5 apples per hour. Like, seriously, you need to consider what you're buying with that money. Apples. The reason apples cost $5, the reason apples you can get 5 for $15 is because the cost of the person to produce and pick the apple, right? So the Apple company, they've automated to a decent extent, but they still have staff members who are making, let's say, $10 an hour. The baker makes $5 more, meaning the baker's time per hour is worth more than the apple picker. When you increase the apple picker's wage to $15 an hour, the cost of the apple goes up. Now the baker is saying to himself, I used to be able to buy 5 apples, now I can only buy 3. I need a raise. Goes to his boss and says, look, man, I can't afford apples anymore. I'm using Apple as just like a widget, as a representation, but think about gasoline. Think about computer products. The real issue is, do we value the hour of an individual? And the answer is, for the most part, we don't value it enough. Changing the minimum wage will not change the value of an hour. So I don't know what the solution is, but that's why I'm a big fan of Yang, because at least he's talking about the problems of automation. Because think about this. If we automate that apple picker's job, the cost of an apple could actually go down a lot. And the baker is now excited because his hour is worth more. He's getting paid $15 an hour. He can buy 10 apples now because the price went down. But that leaves us with another person who can no longer buy any apples. He lost his job. And therein lies the problem of automation. I think we're facing a serious problem with automation that Yang talks about, in that there will come a time where someone will lose their job through no fault of their own. What do? I don't know. Just because, technology will displace someone from their job, it's not fair. And in fact, when the market displaces someone from their job, it's not fair either. But you know what? The world isn't fair. How can we make sure that people aren't put out and homeless simply because of market whims and because of technological advancement? I don't know. What I can say is this problem is extremely complicated, and Bernie Sanders just learned a very important lesson. I mean no ill will towards Bernie. I still like the guy, and I don't think it's necessarily his fault. I think he's learning an important lesson here, though. So I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll keep the conversation going. Next segment will be at youtube.com/TimCastNews at 6 p.m. The podcast is inverted, so stick around, and I will see you all in the next segment. Thanks for hanging out.